Okay. Hi all. I am Dr. Katrina Birch. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Psychological Sciences, and I'm going to be talking to you today about how to make a poster. And it's good to see this turnout. So if you have at any point any questions, you can throw them in the chat, or I'm totally fine if you interrupt me as well. Or you can, raise your little hand on the Zoom screen. And I will say that sometimes I don't see the chat first thing. So if you have a pressing question, just like I said, go ahead and interrupt me. That's totally fine. So I think with that, we should probably get started. So let me pull up my thing here. There we go. All right. Let's see. I just have to move there we go. All right, so I believe you can all see the presentation. So with that, we'll just go ahead and get started. So like I said, I'm here to talk to you today about how to make a poster. And I'm going to talk to you about what a poster is, the elements that tend to make a good poster, kind of where you should begin, some do's and don'ts, software options for making posters, as well as how to give an effective, engaging, but brief talk. It's typically the case that when someone comes up to your poster, they may want to chat, they may not want to chat, but sometimes they'll just say, hey, give me a brief overview of what you did. And so I'll talk to you about how to give that little brief overview. So posters are used in the academic community to communicate our research or creative activity. They're really meant to summarize the information concisely, provide visual information as to what you did, and they include a mixture of text and visual displays, graphs, tables. It depends on your creative activity. I'm a scientist, so I tend to be presenting research where we've collected data and we've analyzed the data. But that's not to say that there aren't other forms of creative activity that don't get, or that get displayed on posters as well. So an effective poster can make a strong impact. So it's definitely worth developing your poster planning skills. It can also be kind of fun to play around with the colors and get the visual information just right. All right. What makes a good poster? It should be readable. The information should be readable from about 10 feet away. You want the title to be short. You don't want it to take up too much space. And sometimes the best posters have really fun, catchy titles. So you can definitely get creative. Oops, and I found a typo. That should say text is clear and to the point. Generally, it's really encouraged to use bullets, numbering, bolding, headlines to make the information easier to digest. You want to use some graphics and some color. These are typically 3 feet by 4 feet. So you definitely want to make sure that it's not just a bunch of block text. You want to break up the space. Making sure that there's consistency throughout, having a clean layout. And then including, any acknowledgments that you may have, or making sure that the authors who contributed to the research or the creative activity and their affiliations are correct. And then definitely using contrast, so high contrasting colors and different shapes to compartmentalize the information can be very valuable. And then it's generally the case that when you should be using the open space or the white space to help create focal points. All right, so where to begin? Title can be catchy, make it succinct. Sometimes it is required that there's an abstract on the poster, but it's not always necessary because your poster actually acts as an abstract. If you do include an abstract, definitely make sure that it's brief, 2-3 sentences at tops. Your introduction or background should be very high level. Assume your audience is not an expert in your topic, so convey that information in an easy to follow way. I provided some examples on the slides of stuff that myself or my students have done in the past. And so here's just an example of some background information on burnout and how job stress over time contributes to burnout. When you're describing your materials or your methods, you want to talk about, or you want to include the information about how you collected the data or the information that's presented. Here's where using figures, tables, and photographs may be very beneficial. I usually use tables here to provide some visually interesting kind of breaking up that the text and making the information easy to find for people who are stopping by. If you have results, if you've done research, you want to make sure that you've briefly described it. But here's again where using visual information can be very beneficial and very helpful. Your results, or the big piece of your creative activity, that should be the biggest part of your poster. So my student here on this slide presented at the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga, and she has her model, front and center, graphically displayed, and the text at the top has her main research findings. So it's like in your face. And then the conclusion. What is the main takeaway? Why does it matter? Convince your audience that your work is interesting. You find it interesting. You found it interesting enough to submit it to the showcase, to put your information on a poster. So you have to then convince your audience why it's interesting. And then some other odds and ends. You can include a literature cited section on your poster, but that's not always necessary. You can cut if there isn't any room. Instead, what I've seen more and more often is the use of QR codes that link to Google Docs with the information, either with a copy of the poster so that people can use it or contact you if they're interested in following up with your work, or a Google Doc with just the references there for people who are interested. And then acknowledgements are important. So for example, if you received a FUSE grant, or were funded as a student on a professor's RCAP or any other type of grant, you're going to want to acknowledge that on your poster. If you received support in any way to conduct the research or engage in the creative activity, that should definitely be acknowledged, but you want to make sure that you specifically mentioned the sources of support for doing the work that you did. All right, some do's and don'ts. So this is actually a picture of a poster I made when I was a PhD student. There's some good things here and there are some bad things here. When I made this, I was like, man, this is the prettiest looking poster I've ever made. And then as I was thinking about giving this talk, I looked at it and I was like, well, there's definitely some problems here. So the number one mistake is making a poster too wordy. I would probably argue that there are sections of this poster that are far too wordy. The number two mistake is a failure to maintain a pleasing amount of white space. Here's where I think the white space is actually working to the advantage. And I was a student at the University of Connecticut. The colors are navy and white. And so hence the kind of color scheme I ended up with for this poster. It tends to be that when you go to a conference, you go to the Student Scholar Showcase, people tend to focus on using colors that represent the university, and that's totally cool. Red's a great color, so, but I use navy, like I said, because of UConn. Do not add bullets to section headings. Instead, you want to use larger bolded font. I tend to put my section headings in text boxes, and I've done that here on this poster. And then you want to make sure that you don't clutter the top of your poster with logos. I tend to include a logo for the university, and then I also include a logo of the granting agencies that have supported my research, but you definitely don't want to get too overzealous with those logos. All right. The other thing that can be fairly difficult, especially when you're kind of laying out the poster, is making sure that you keep the text box width consistent. So on this example, you can see that the text boxes on the left-hand side, the width of those is consistent, and then the ones on the right-hand side are consistent. And so sometimes it's just kind of figuring out how to get the words and the pictures and the tables and the graphs and the right kind of format to make sure that everything is consistent. And then you want to make sure that the line spacing is uniform. I will say that the most time spent on a poster is in formatting and making sure that everything looks neat. All right, and then you want to make sure that the details or the big takeaways are or can be viewed from 6 feet away, because people will stand back and look at your poster. And so that's where I tend to have students like make sure that they have the big takeaway in big bolded font in the center, something that's a little provocative and catches people's attention so that they want to kind of saunter over and find out more. All right, and then software options. PowerPoint is probably one of the most popular options for making a poster. And then through WKU, we all have access to kind of the Microsoft Online. So I'll illustrate how to make a poster in PowerPoint on the next couple of slides. Another format that I've had students use is the Better Poster template. It was created by a scientist, and I'm blanking on his name. I think his name is Mike something or other. But all of his materials for this thing that's called the Better Poster template can be found via his open science framework. And I've included that link there. And so he has different templates, typically in PowerPoint, I believe. And then you can use his templates to lay out your poster, which look pretty cool. Again, you can get creative with those colors. And then you can also use Adobe Illustrator or Canva, but I'm less familiar with those. All right, so creating a poster in PowerPoint, you want to start with a blank slide. So when you open PowerPoint, it's got like the title and the subtitle is basically a title slide. I just delete those boxes. And so you want to start with the blank slide. And I like took these pictures on my computer. And so on the next couple of slides, I've got some green arrows and circles to kind of highlight where things are in PowerPoint that you need to go to. All right, so next you're going to go to the design tab, which is towards the left-hand side menu bar at the top. And so you'll want to click on that. And that's where you see typically all of the different color options for slides that you can have, but we don't really care about any of that because what we really want is the slide size tab, which is to the right. And what you're going to do is you're going to click on custom slide down here at the bottom, this custom slide size. And then this screen pops up. And here is where you are going to change the width of the slide to typically 48 inches because they tend to be presented in landscape form. But if you are presenting at a conference that's not the Student Scholar Showcase, and sometimes they have very specific guidelines about poster size, so you want to pay attention to that. So that poster that I showed you that I had done at UConn a few slides ago, that was, I think, the only poster I've ever done in portrait layout because that was the specifications of that conference that I went to. All right, so here's where you change the width to 48 inches and the height to 36 inches. So that's a 3x4 poster. And then you'll hit OK. And then this screen pops up, and I tend to select ensure fit versus maximize fit. I'm not sure why. I can't really tell you. But I think it looks better. So. And then when that's done, what you have is, again, your slide, but it is really zoomed out. So I kind of highlighted here and it's really small, but it says 18%. Whereas when you open a PowerPoint slide, it's typically at, 100%. So this is really zoomed out. And then what you then can start doing is you can start creating text boxes, laying out your title, choosing different colors, things like that to fill in the information. And this is kind of like you have to zoom in and then zoom out to see what it looks like. And definitely, like I said, the most time in creating a poster is actually laying it out. And then I do want to say for a second that depending on how you are printing your poster, whether it's through the WKU print shop or in Ogden College, we have a poster printer. If you are an Ogden student, you have to get it there to the print shop a couple of weeks early. So probably I would err on 2 weeks early, because around the time of the Student Scholar Showcase, people are printing posters a lot, and it takes a little while to get them printed. And so if they've got too many to print, they're going to tell you, can't do it. So definitely make sure that you are giving yourself enough time to get your poster printed. All right, so when you give a talk, you typically want to make sure that it's brief. You want to have a hook. You want to get them interested in your research question and your creative activity. So I tend to start with like what I'm interested in, or maybe I'll say something a little more provocative, like, did you know that when your colleagues are rude to you, that can make you more aggressive on the road? So that's some of my research. I look at workplace incivility or workplace mistreatment and how that can influence folks' behavior outside the workplace. But I'll start with something that's a little more thought-provoking to kind of reel people in and get them interested in wanting to know more. So I've provided some examples here. So I might start with like, I'm interested in how having a bad day at work may lead to aggressive driving behaviors on the commute home. And then you want to discuss some background to your project. For example, in searching the literature, I found, or we found, if it's a group effort, that while a lot of past research focuses on who the driver is in aggressive driving, it's like folks who tend to be younger, more hostile, tend to engage in more aggressive driving. There's a lot of research on that, but not a lot of research actually focuses on the situational kind of context that may influence aggressive driving. And then this part where you're talking about your background, if there are terms that need to be defined, you're going to want to define those for your audience. Again, don't assume that your audience is an expert. And especially at the Student Scholar Showcase, there's a lot of folks that come around who, we typically wouldn't interact with within our disciplines, which is, I think, the best part of the Student Scholar Showcase, is that you get to see and experience the variety of research and creative activities that are happening on campus. And then you'll want to finish your background or your introduction with hypotheses, if you have them, or research questions. For example, I hypothesize that on days when employees experience incivility at work, they will be more likely to engage in aggressive driving on the commute home. And then you talk about how you collected your data or how you got your information. Did you go to an archive? Did you do a systematic review? Did you collect data from participants using surveys? Did you conduct an experiment? You're going to want to tell your audience how you got that information. So we conducted a 10-day daily diary study where each day our sample of 109 employees filled out a survey measures included. So if you did do a survey, you're going to want to tell your audience, what you used to collect that information. Did you use measures? Did you come up with questions on your own? How did you get that information? And then results. What did you find? Tell your audience. So here you want to demonstrate your command of the material. You can also point to different information on the slide or on the poster, pardon me, to highlight different points. Again, using visuals and graphs and charts and photos, breaking up that white space and then kind of pointing it out as you're talking can be very effective. And then you'll want to say that or end with, what the big picture is. Why does it matter? I always tell my students, you have to tell me why I should care. Why should I care if people are being rude to each other at work? Why does that matter? And then kind of think about what the big picture is, what you might want to do next as well. So, and that could be, anything, but making sure that you are able to summarize in a 2 to 3 minute talk or longer if the directions for the conference say, be prepared to give a 5-minute talk. You'll want to make sure that you have a good grasp of what you did and be able to talk about it in a succinct, cohesive way. All right, so any questions? Oh, and then just make sure that before we end or before you end, there is a brief survey to ask about or to evaluate the presentation. All right. Is it possible for us to get a copy of the PowerPoint presentation? I'm very happy to share the PowerPoint presentation with you all. You can, and I'll maybe defer to Dr. Budziak. Oh, and he says that he can help facilitate that. I will make sure that I share the PowerPoint with Dr. Budziak, and please correct me if I'm mispronouncing your name. And he'll make sure that you all have access to it. But yeah, I'm totally happy to share that with you.
Sorry, I have a list of all the attendees, so I'm happy if you'll send that to me later to just distribute it to the people who are on the list here today. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Any other questions, folks? Okay, well, thank you for spending your evening with me. I hope you all have wonderful plans this evening. And if you don't have a Valentine to share your evening with, treat yourself as your own Valentine. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go home and, I don't know, watch The Bachelor with my kiddo or something. So with that, I guess I will leave it to you all. Do not forget to take the survey for the evaluation, please, if you're still around, and I will bid you all a good night.